This video is dedicated to Broken Mech and Integralmath, who both have great channels, by the way, because they both have rejected the compatibilist position in favor of hard determinism, but yet have not offered any arguments against compatibilism. Broken Mech says that compatibilism is trying to reconcile the two positions, but that it ultimately fails at this, though he doesn't back this up. And Integralmath has said that Daniel Dennett has done a deepity, but he doesn't say what the deepity is or how it's relevant. Before I continue, I'll admit that there are irreconcilable differences between the two extreme positions, hard determinism and anti-determinism. But more significant than what they disagree on is what they both agree on. They both agree that you must either have agency or you don't. And I suppose that if you're used to arguing or debating with someone who agrees with you, then you might neglect to explore the area of agreement in order to check your mutual assumptions. Whereas normally we would look for errors in our areas of disagreement. I'll just sum up my position as absolute freedom is an oxymoron. Now, to go into more detail, in this video, I want to obliterate the following idea. And that is the general idea. The general idea goes something like this. Many of our social and legal policies are founded on the concept of free will. But this free will is not real, it's only an illusion, and therefore these social and legal policies are not well founded. More specifically, the idea or argument that I want to obliterate goes something like this. We normally think that there are some situations where an individual has control over their own actions, and can thus rightly and justly be blamed or praised or punished or rewarded for their own actions. And that there are some situations where an individual does not have control over their actions, and thus it would not be appropriate to blame, praise, punish, or reward them. But the truth is that there are no situations where an individual has control over their own actions, since free will does not exist. Those decisions are never actually made by the individual. Rather, they've already been made for the individual, and so the individual can never justly be blamed, praised, punished, or rewarded. You know, you didn't build that. Here's another form of the argument. I did not make that decision, my brain did it. My brain made me do it. Hold on a second. Was it really your brain, or was it your brain's brain? Or maybe it was your brain's brain. Or maybe it wasn't any brain at all. Maybe it was just the entire universe. Now that's what I call a deepity. According to Integralmath, conscious awareness of the decision comes after the decision has already been made. And this is supposed to be a problem for anyone who believes in free will. And this probably is a problem for non-compatibilists on the free will side of the debate, though I can't really speak for them. Also, according to Integralmath, if you do not have a conscious choice that precedes the decision that you make, then you do not have any component of will in that decision you make. It has been made for you. So, according to Integralmath, this is the standard required to have free will. But my question is, who set that standard? I know it wasn't me. My guess is that this standard was set by some kind of non-compatibilist. I don't see why having a genuine free will or agency would require that a conscious awareness of making a decision precedes the decision-making process. Firstly, because this should not depend on your definition of consciousness, which is ill-defined, and secondly, because conscious awareness of making a decision is not relevant to the question of whether that process is itself free or not. That is the real question. The question is not, do you know the process, or do you experience the process on some higher level, but simply, is the process itself free? The standard hard determinist argument is, basically, you can't say that someone has free will if their behavior is predetermined by a chain of cause and effect that stretches back through space and time to the very beginning. Does that argument sound reasonable to you? Well, if that argument sounds reasonable to you, then how about this one? You can't really say that any car is faster than any other, because in reality, there are no fast cars. It's just an illusion that some cars are fast. Since all cars travel slower than the speed of light, all cars are slow by my standard of slow, which is anything slower than the speed of light. Someone tell me, why do we need to have such a high standard? Incompatibilists all agree that there is a contradiction between agency and determinism. The practical question more or less boils down to this: did I make that decision, or was the decision made for me? This concept has real-world application. What is the general difference between quitting or being fired? We all understand what it means to say fired versus quit. They don't mean the same thing. The difference has to do with the pragmatic concept of freedom and agency. And this is still true in general, that there is a difference in agency, even though it is true that you can get yourself fired, and it is true that you can be forced to quit. The distinction of fired versus quit still means something, and it still tells us something important. It answers the question, did I make the decision to leave my job, or was the decision made for me? Now, conscious awareness or knowledge does factor in to questions of whether or not free will is present, but ask yourself this question: why would awareness matter at all? According to me, awareness matters because your knowledge and awareness is causally connected to your decision making. The fact that experiments have shown that a computer can tell what a person will do before that person becomes aware of what they will do is not relevant. Hard determinists say that free will is an illusion, but the real illusion here is that there are only two possibilities. Either A, I've made a decision, or B, the decision's been made for me. If you think that either A or B is true but not both, then if you find that B is true, you will conclude that A is false. In certain specific situations, this A or B dichotomy makes a lot of sense, but you are abusing this dichotomy if you try to apply it to more general abstract questions, where it will become useless and meaningless. Here's one scenario where it would be appropriate to use this model. Suppose that you have committed to a strict diet, and then someone tempts you with ice cream, and you end up eating an entire tub of ice cream. Now suppose that instead of just tempting you, someone puts a gun to your head and tells you that they will shoot unless you eat an entire tub of ice cream, and so you do. Free will is found in the difference between these two situations. It does make perfect sense to say that in the first case, the decision was made by you, and in the second, the decision was made by the person holding the gun. It does not matter that in both situations you still had a choice of whether or not to eat the ice cream. And it does not matter that in both situations the choice was predetermined. It still makes sense to feel guilty about giving in to temptation and eating the ice cream, but not to feel guilty about eating ice cream to save your life. It would make perfect sense to blame yourself in the first case, but not in the second. That would not imply the application of a double standard, because in the one case you're clearly more free than in the other. Freedom is a reference to the difference between these scenarios, not to anything that they have in common. No freedom is absolute. All freedom is relative. Absolute freedom is an oxymoron. When the person puts a gun to your head, we say that it takes away your free will. Even though you could still choose not to eat the ice cream, the gun is still sufficient to relieve you of your responsibility and guilt over eating the ice cream. The concept of freedom and agency that is considered relevant to whether or not we should blame people for their actions, which we also call free will, is not any kind of absolute freedom. It's not freedom from everything. It's only the kind of freedom that makes sense. It is just common sense to say that people who are in jail are less free than those who are not, even though no one has absolute freedom, and even though we all need to obey the laws of physics. Nonetheless, some people are more free than others, and some choices are more free than others, and we need to have ways of identifying this relative agency and freedom. It's not an illusion. Freedom is very real. When we speak about freedom in a social or legal context, we don't mean absolute or general freedom. Rather, there's a very specific sort of freedom that is relevant. That freedom is the influence of rules and penalties. When we let someone off the hook because they don't have mens rea, because they're either too young, too stupid, or too insane, this is because we value an efficient system. We don't waste punishments on people who cannot be influenced by punishments. We say that those people lacked a certain free will, but what we really mean is that these people are beyond our sphere of influence. If their behavior depends on the rules that we set, then we can say that they have free will because their behavior is malleable in a way that we want it to be. It responds to our rules and enforcement policies. If it cannot be moved by our rules and enforcement policies, then we say that it's not free, and so we don't even bother trying. Why waste a punishment on someone who we cannot influence anyways? In other words, freedom with respect to punishment and blame just means freedom to be influenced or freedom to be controlled. So, from another perspective, it looks like it's not freedom, since people who feel controlled don't feel free. But that's okay, there's no contradiction there.